Imagine you haven't opened your email in 3 days because every subject line reads like a threat. Overdue notice. Final warning. Account suspended. Now imagine that on the 4th day, buried between a credit card alert and a spam coupon, there's a message from a law office in a town you've never heard of, telling you that a woman you have never met has left you everything she owned. Would you delete it? Would you assume it was a scam? Or would something deep and irrational inside you, something that sounds a lot like desperation, make you click? For Clara Ashby, that click changed the entire shape of her life, but not in the way she expected. In the winter of 2022, Clara was 31 years old and running out of road. She worked a morning shift at a bakery in Knoxville, and evenings waitressing at a sports bar 3 miles away, and she was still falling behind on rent for a studio apartment she shared with her cat and a space heater that only worked on its lowest setting. She had no savings. She had no family. Her mother had died of a stroke when Clara was 19, and her father had been gone long before that. A vague shape at the edge of her childhood who eventually stopped showing up at all. No grandparents, she remembered. No aunts who sent birthday cards. No cousins whose names she knew. She had built her adult life out of stubbornness and low expectations, and even that was starting to crack. The email arrived on a Tuesday. The subject line read, "Estate of Agnes Whitmore, urgent legal matter requiring your response." The sender was a firm called Callaway & Marsh, attorneys at law, based in Harlan County, Kentucky. Clara read it twice standing in her kitchen at 6 in the morning, still in her coat. She assumed it was a scam. She Googled the firm anyway. It was real. A website, a tidy brick office, a man named Philip Callaway who had practiced estate law in Kentucky for 38 years. She called the number. Philip Callaway did not sound like a scammer. He sounded like a man who had spent 4 decades delivering complicated news to confused people and had developed a patient cadence for it. He told Clara that Agnes Whitmore had passed away 6 weeks earlier, at 87. He told her that Agnes had owned a property called Whitmore Hollow, 42 acres in a remote valley south of Harlan, with a farmhouse, a barn, and a dried lavender operation that had gone dormant nearly 15 years before. He told her that according to Agnes's will, all of it now belonged to Clara. Clara sat down on her kitchen floor, still in her coat. "Mr. Callaway," she said carefully, "I've never heard of Agnes Whitmore. I've never been to Harlan County. I don't know anyone in Kentucky." "I'm aware this comes as a surprise," the lawyer said. Agnes anticipated that response. She left specific documentation to confirm your identity, your date of birth, your mother's name, your mother's maiden name before she remarried the elementary school you attended in Morristown. Agnes was thorough. Clara's hand tightened around the phone. Her mother's maiden name. The school in Morristown. Those weren't things you found on social media. "There's a condition," Callaway went on, his tone shifting slightly. Not ominous, but careful. "The will includes a residency stipulation. Before the deed transfers to your name, you must live on the property for 45 consecutive days. You may not leave for more than 18 hours at a stretch. If you fail to meet the condition, the estate passes to the Harlan County Heritage Preservation Board." Clara was quiet for a moment. Why? Agnes didn't explain her reasoning in the will. "In my experience," Callaway said, "people who leave conditions like this usually have a very specific reason. They just don't always share it." She asked how much the land was worth. Callaway paused in a way that told her the answer mattered. A land assessor valued the property at approximately $1.4 million 2 years ago. The farmhouse is in poor condition, but the acreage alone, given recent development interest in that corridor, would likely sell for considerably more today. Clara was at Whitmore Hollow 4 days later. The drive from Knoxville took just under 3 hours, the last 40 minutes of it on roads that kept narrowing, as if the land itself were trying to discourage visitors. Her GPS gave up a mile before the destination, and she finished the drive on handwritten directions Callaway had mailed her. Actual paper, actual pen. She turned off the county road onto a gravel track marked by a rusted gate hanging crooked from a stone post, and drove through a corridor of overgrown cedars until the track opened into a wide, wild clearing. The farmhouse sat at the center of it, white paint gone grey and peeling, a wrap-around porch whose floorboards had warped in the weather. The lavender fields stretched east, row after abandoned row, gone to seed, stalks brown and silvery in the flat winter light. The barn beyond them listed slightly to the left. The whole property smelled of cold earth and something sweetly rotten she couldn't place. Clara sat in the car a long moment, looking at all of it. Then she got out, because she didn't have another option. She had her hand on the porch railing, testing it, when a voice behind her said, "You shouldn't touch that. Third board from the left is rotted clean through." She spun around. An old man stood at the edge of the tree line, hands in the pockets of a canvas work coat, watching her with an expression that could have been friendly or could have been a warning. Mid-70s, lean, unhurried, a white beard trimmed close, eyes taking steady inventory of her. "Who are you?" "Hector Briggs," the man said, without moving closer. "Got a place about a mile back, through those cedars. I've kept an eye on this property for Agnes the past several years, since she got too frail to manage it herself." He tilted his head. "She never told me who she was leaving it to, just that someone would show up eventually." "Clara Ashby. I'm the new owner." She said it with more confidence than she felt. Hector looked at her a long moment. "Ashby," he repeated quietly, as if the name meant something. Then his expression closed over. "Water heaters in the utility closet off the kitchen. Old, but it works. Front bedroom upstairs has a sound roof, the others don't." He turned to go. "Wait, did you know her, Agnes?" "Most of my life," Hector said, not turning around. "She was a stubborn woman who carried things she should have put down years ago." A pause. "Watch yourself in this place, Miss Ashby. Agnes didn't die peaceful." Then he walked back into the cedars and was gone. The first week was a study in endurance. The front bedroom held, but the rest of the house leaked cold air from a dozen unseen gaps. The kitchen faucet ran rust-colored for the first 30 seconds every morning. There was no cell service indoors. She had to walk to the southeast corner of the lavender field for 2 unreliable bars. The nearest town, a crossroads called Belfry Hollow, with a gas station and a dollar store, was 22 minutes away. But the house was not empty of interest. Agnes had lived there over 50 years, and she had been a keeper of things. Not a hoarder, but a woman with a system. Books organized by subject, kitchen equipment by frequency of use. The parlor shelves held framed photographs in careful chronological order. Agnes at various ages, the farm through the seasons, faces Clara didn't recognize but who recurred often enough to suggest they'd mattered. On the 8th day, cleaning out a back hallway closet, mostly to have something to do, Clara found the door. It was set into the wall beneath the staircase, about 4 feet high, painted the same cream as the surrounding plaster. No doorknob, just a small brass hook-and-eye latch. She unfastened it, and the door swung inward on hinges that shrieked with rust. She had to duck to get inside. The room was about the size of a large closet, and it was nothing like the rest of the house, spare and deliberate where everything else was warm and cluttered. A single wooden chair, a folding table. On the table, a metal lockbox, a kerosene lantern, and a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon the color of dried lavender. She reached for the letters first. They were addressed in a tight, precise cursive she didn't recognize, on envelopes yellowed with age. The return address on the top one read, E. Ashby, 14 Moreland Street, Morristown, TN. Ashby, her name. Clara's hands went still. She opened the letter. It was dated April 1979, and it began, "Agnes, I have to tell you what I found in the cellar. I have to tell you before I lose my nerve." It was signed your Eleanor. Eleanor Ashby, Clara's grandmother. A woman who had died before Clara was born, whom her mother had rarely spoken of, and when she did, always with a strange flattened quality, like she was describing someone she'd read about rather than known. What was her grandmother doing writing to Agnes Whitmore in 1979? What had she found in the cellar? Clara was still sitting on the floor of the hidden room. 40 minutes later, letters spread around her when she heard tires on the gravel outside. She came out blinking into the cold afternoon light. A black Suburban with Tennessee plates had pulled up beside her Honda, and a man stepped out with the confidence of someone accustomed to things going his way. Late 40s, broad-shouldered, a jacket that cost more than her monthly rent, and a smile that arrived before its actual intention did, like a scout sent ahead. He extended his hand. Preston Whitmore. Agnes was my aunt. Clara shook it without thinking. Mr. Calloway didn't mention any surviving family. Preston's smile held, but something behind his eyes recalibrated. Philip Calloway is very thorough about legal documents and very limited about family dynamics. My aunt and I had our differences. That doesn't change the fact that Whitmore Hollow has been in our family 4 generations. He looked past her at the house, the fields, with an expression that was almost proprietary. She had no right to give it to a stranger. She had every legal right. If you have concerns, take them to Mr. Calloway. I already have. The smile finally dropped, and what was underneath it was colder. I'm going to be straightforward, because I looked into your situation before I drove out here, and I think you're a reasonable person. 2 jobs, behind on rent, no real savings. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. I'm prepared to offer you $400,000, deposited within 48 hours. All you have to do is sign a disclaimer withdrawing your claim and vacate the property. You break the residency clause, the land goes to the Heritage Board, and I buy it back through an arrangement I already have in place. You walk away with $400,000. I get my family's land back. Simple. Clara looked at the document in his hand. $400,000. She thought about the space heater on its lowest setting. She thought about the credit card alerts. Then she thought about the letters spread on the floor of the hidden room. Her grandmother's handwriting. Why do you want it so badly? She asked. The house is falling apart. The Lavender's been dead for 15 years. What do you actually want, Preston? Something moved across his face, quick and dark. I want what belongs to my family. You know about Eleanor Ashby, Clara said. It wasn't a question, and she watched his jaw tighten enough to know she was right. Sign the paperwork. His voice had gone flat. There are things in this ground better left alone. Agnes understood that, and she still died frightened and alone. That's not the outcome I'd wish on you. Clara stepped back toward the porch. Get off my property. Preston looked at her a long moment, then folded the document, put it back in his jacket, and walked to the Suburban without another word. He didn't peel out. He drove away at a measured, unhurried pace, like a man who'd already decided how this would end. Clara went inside and locked the door. She spent the next 2 hours reading every letter in the bundle, 11 of them, spanning 1974 to 1983, all from Eleanor to Agnes, written with the taut urgency of someone trying to process something she couldn't say out loud. By the last one, Clara's tea had gone cold, and her hands were not entirely steady. In the summer of 1973, Eleanor Ashby, 23, newly married, newly moved to Morristown, had been staying at Whitmore Hollow to help Agnes prepare for the lavender harvest. Agnes's husband at the time, Douglas Whitmore, Preston's uncle, was a property developer who had married her for the farm's land value and had spent years quietly trying to move it out of her name through paperwork she was too trusting to question until it was almost too late. That summer, Douglas brought a business partner to the farm. The letters called him only B, and the 2 of them spent 3 days conducting what they called a survey of the property. On the 3rd night, Eleanor woke at 2 in the morning for water and heard voices from the barn. She followed them. What she found in the barn's lower level, a deep underground cavity the original Whitmore family had used for cold storage in the 19th century, was not a survey. It was a transaction. Douglas and his partner overseeing the unloading of a vehicle. Eleanor saw only part of it before footsteps sent her back to the house. but it was enough to understand that Douglas Whitmore was involved in something well beyond property development. Eleanor told Agnes. Agnes confronted Douglas. Douglas, according to the letters, turned violent. 3 months later, he walked out of Whitmore Hollow and never came back, and Agnes told everyone her husband had simply abandoned her. Plausible enough in 1973 that no one pressed further. The letters stopped in 1983. The last one read only, Agnes, my daughter is 3 years old and I can't have this following us. Whatever is still down there, leave it. Bury it, forget it. I'm sorry. I love you, Eleanor. Clara set it down, her daughter, Clara's mother, 3 years old in 1983. A postscript had been added to that final letter in a different ink, the hand slightly shakier. The thing I'm most afraid of isn't what's in the ground. It's Preston. Douglas's blood. He's been asking questions. Clara sat in the dark a while. Then she got up, found the flashlight she'd bought in Belfry Hollow, put on her heaviest coat, and went out to the barn. The main level was what she expected. Old equipment, cedar crates, coiled irrigation hose. But at the back, behind a wall of empty shelving that swung outward when she pressed the right upright beam, there was a staircase descending into stone. Clara went down. The cold hit her first, a 10-degree drop in a few steps, the air dry and still. The lower level was roughly the size of a 2-car garage, flagstone floor, stone walls, a ceiling just high enough to stand under. Wooden support pillars ran down the center. Along the far wall, stacked in rows that had slumped with age, were wooden crates, some sealed with iron banding, some open. She shone her flashlight into the nearest open crate. Envelopes, hundreds of them, wrapped in oilcloth gone to rot. She lifted one out, thick, sealed, addressed in a hand she didn't know. The return address printed, Whitmore Development Partners, Nashville, TN, postmarked 1972. Another crate held unsealed envelopes. She opened one and found a cashier's check for $47,000, made out to a name she didn't recognize, drawn on a bank that no longer existed, dated November 1971. Her flashlight swept the remaining crates, dozens of them. This wasn't just money, it was documentation, a paper trail for something large and carefully hidden. She was still processing that when she heard the barn door open above her. She cut the flashlight. In the blackness, footsteps crossed the barn floor, more than one set. The shelving unit creaked as it was moved aside, and a bright beam swept down the staircase. She found the stairs, Preston's voice from the top. I told you she would. A second voice, lower, laconic. Then we deal with it. Clara was already moving, hands out, navigating from the mental map she'd built in the last 20 minutes. Storage on the left, pillars down the center, and on the right a section of wall where the stone was a slightly different texture. Newer, reconstructed. She remembered what her grandmother had written, Douglas and his partner unloading something they'd needed a way to bring in that wasn't the stairs. She moved along the wall fast and silent while the footsteps grew louder, and her fingers caught an edge. Not stone, wood, fitted to look like stone. A panel. She found the catch and pulled. Cold outdoor air poured through. She ducked through and came out on her hands and knees in the winter dark, 60 yards behind the barn, the opening hidden by a thicket of dormant blackberry canes. She ran uphill, away from the barn, toward the cedar line, Preston's voice sharp and urgent somewhere behind her. The lavender fields fell away behind her, the farmhouse to her left, the cedars 50 yards ahead. She hit the tree line and kept going, branches scraping her face, her phone dead in her pocket with no signal. She needed the county road. She needed distance. She was maybe 300 yards in when a hand caught her arm. She nearly screamed. Quiet. Hector, materializing from the dark beside a big cedar, a lantern shielded in his palm, his face set and grim. I saw his car come back, figured. He let go of her arm. You went in the barn. There are crates down there, Clara said, catching her breath. Letters. Checks. Hundreds of them. What was Douglas Whitmore doing? Hector was quiet a moment. Behind them, toward the farm, a flashlight beam swept the far edge of the cedars, searching. In the early 1970s, he said, Douglas Whitmore and his partners were running a deed fraud operation. They targeted elderly rural landowners across 5 states, got them to sign documents they didn't understand, moved the land out of their names, resold it through shell companies. Went on almost a decade. The FBI was building a case in 1973. He paused. Then Douglas disappeared, the operation fell apart, and the investigation went cold. Nobody could find the records tying it all together. They're in that cellar. Agnes found out in the fall of '73, right around when she told Douglas to leave. She's the one who pulled together the documents he'd hidden on the property and locked them in cold storage. She spent 50 years making sure nobody got to them. He met her eyes. Preston's known about that cellar for years. He hasn't wanted this land for sentiment. He's wanted those documents destroyed before someone found them. Some of those victims are probably still alive, Clara said. Their families, or their children, or their grandchildren. He held her gaze. Agnes knew what she was doing when she left this place to you. Your grandmother wrote her those letters. Eleanor was the first person who ever told Agnes the truth about Douglas. Agnes never forgot it. The flashlight beam in the cedars was getting closer. My truck's on the back access track, Hector said. Old logging road connects to Route 119 about 2 miles east. Preston doesn't know about it. Come on. She followed him through the cedars, fast in the dark, guided by his shielded lantern and 50 years of knowing exactly where every root and drainage cut lay. Behind them, Preston's voice carried through the cold air, sharp and controlled, the voice of someone still calculating, even angry. They came out on a track barely wider than the truck's mirrors. Hector had it moving before her door was fully closed, no headlights until they cleared the trees, then pushed it hard down the washboard surface toward the county road. Clara got a signal before they reached the highway. She called 911, then Philip Calloway. Then she sat with her hands wrapped around her knees, watching the winter Kentucky night scroll past the window, thinking about her grandmother writing letters she never expected anyone to read, and about a woman named Agnes who had stayed in a house above a secret for 50 years to make sure it survived long enough to matter. The aftermath took months, not days. When the Harlan County Sheriff's Department reached Whitmore Hollow that night, they found Preston and the man with him. A private investigator named Wade Cutler, still in the cellar, which turned out to be a strategic error on Preston's part, since it put him at the scene of the very evidence he'd come to destroy. The crates held over 400 documents spanning 11 years of the Whitmore Development Partners fraud, implicating Douglas Whitmore and 6 other men in the illegal transfer of land belonging to rural families across Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, and North Carolina. 3 of the co-conspirators were still alive. Preston was charged with evidence tampering, criminal conspiracy, and trespassing, among other things. Wade Cutler cut a deal. The federal investigation that reopened took the better part of a year. It ended with a settlement fund for the families of the defrauded landowners, a process Clara, as custodian of the documents and legal heir to the estate, was asked to help with. She did. She found she was better at it than she expected, the kind of work that rewards patience, stubbornness, and a high tolerance for bureaucratic attrition, all of which she turned out to have in supply. She completed her 45 days at Whitmore Hollow. She signed the deed. She didn't go back to Knoxville. She spent the first spring on her hands and knees in the East Field, cutting away 15 years of dead growth to see what was left underneath. More was left than she'd expected. The root systems of true lavender run deep and stubborn, and what looks dead on the surface isn't always dead at the root. By April, green was coming up in patches across 3 of the 6 rows. By June, the scent of it was everywhere. Clean, serious, faintly resinous, the smell of something coming back to itself after a long winter. Hector took her up on the guest apartment above the barn. Closer to the access track, he said, which was true, and he spent mornings walking the property's perimeter with a coffee and an unhurried authority, like a man who'd finally been given permission to stop pretending he didn't belong somewhere. She found more of her grandmother's letters that summer, not in the hidden room, but in a shoebox on the top pantry shelf, behind a row of old canning jars. These were from Agnes to Eleanor, warmer, longer, full of ordinary details about the farm and the seasons and the small difficulties of keeping a place like Whitmore Hollow alive. One, from 1976, held a single pressed sprig of lavender, still faintly purple, and a note, "I keep this going for both of us. I keep it going so someone will find it." Clara framed it and hung it in the kitchen, where she could see it from the table every morning over coffee. She had arrived at Whitmore Hollow with 2 jobs, no margin, and the quiet conviction that she was always a few bad weeks from falling through the floor of her own life. She hadn't known who Agnes Whitmore was, what her grandmother had left behind, or what it felt like to stand on land that was genuinely, legally, irrevocably hers. One morning the following October, she walked the perimeter of the lavender fields as the mist lifted off the valley floor. The stalks were in full bloom, row after row of deep purple-gray in the autumn light, humming faintly with the season's last bees. The farmhouse behind her had new porch boards and fresh white paint for the first time in decades. The barn had its roof back. She hadn't found what she came for, because she hadn't come for anything in particular. She had come out of desperation and a curiosity she couldn't fully explain, and found instead what she hadn't known to look for, a name that meant something, a place that held her people's history, a story she was finally old enough to finish. She had found her roots. Now it's your turn. If a stranger left you land worth over $1 million, with one condition, 45 days, no exceptions, would you stay? And if you found what Clara found in that cellar, would you have the nerve to do what she did? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's not too late to find where you belong. Subscribe to inherit our drama. We post new stories every week, and they are always worth the wait.